In the soaring glass towers of Seoul, Kang Jae-Min was known as the Iron Shadow. He was a man who believed that money could buy loyalty and that power was the only language the world understood. He looked at the city and saw a kingdom. He looked at his employees and saw chess pieces. And he looked at the woman cleaning his floors and saw nothing at all. But tonight, the Iron Shadow was crumbling. A digital ghost had breached his fortress, liquidating his billions in a matter of heartbeats. Desperate and blinded by panic, Jae-Min reached for the one thing he thought would save him, the power cord, a move that would have permanently erased his empire and his life. If you pull that, the logic bomb will detonate. You'll be penniless and dead before the sun rises. Amara. For 3 years, Amara Okoye had been a ghost in his halls, a cleaner from Lagos who never spoke, never complained, and never existed in Jae-Min's world. But as her fingers hit the keyboard with the precision of a surgeon, the hierarchy of the city shifted. This is the unbelievable story of a man who ruled with an iron fist, only to find his survival rested in the hands of the woman he never bothered to learn the name of. It is a story of hidden brilliance, the stinging cold of betrayal, and the moment a king realized that genius doesn't always wear a suit and tie. Sometimes, it's the person you've spent your whole life looking down on. For 3 years, Amara Okoye had mastered the art of being a shadow in a world of blinding neon. To Kang Jae-Min, she was merely a rhythmic sound in the background, the soft shush of a mop against marble, the clinical spray of glass cleaner, the rustle of a trash liner being replaced at 2:00 a.m. He spoke over her as if she were furniture, negotiated blood-soaked contracts while she dusted his bookshelves, and plotted the expansion of his Iron Shadow empire while she emptied his paper shredder. He never realized that while he was busy ruling Seoul, Amara was busy learning it. She knew the secrets he thought were buried in encrypted drives. She had seen the reflection of his private ledgers in the freshly waxed surface of his desk. She knew which loyal lieutenants sweated when the boss turned his back and which ones lingered too long near his private safe. To Jae-Min, she was a woman of limited English and even more limited ambition, a simple worker from a distant land who was lucky to be in his presence. He never noticed the way her eyes scanned the lines of code on his secondary monitors, or how her posture changed when he discussed server migrations. Amara had gathered the fragments of his life like the dust she swept into her pan. She knew that his chief of security, the man currently standing at the door with a hand on his holster, had been meeting with rivals in the dark corners of the Mapo district. She had found the discarded burner phone SIM cards in the executive washroom and noted the frequency of encrypted pings coming from the office next door. Jae-Min lived in a world of high-tech surveillance and armed guards, yet he was completely exposed because he had forgotten the most basic rule of survival. The most dangerous person in the room is the one you've trained yourself not to see. As she moved through the office tonight, the bucket of gray water reflecting the crimson, system-critical warnings on the walls, Amara felt a cold sense of irony. For 36 months, she had lived in the silence he imposed on her. She had let him believe she was invisible to protect her own life, hiding the genius that had once made her the most hunted coder in West Africa. But as she watched Jae-Min's hand move toward that server cable, a move that would trigger the traitor's final trap, the silence became a luxury she could no longer afford. The simple cleaner was about to step out of the shadows, and the Iron Shadow was about to realize that the woman he had ignored for 1,000 days was the only person on Earth who knew how to save him. To understand why a woman of Amara's intellect was currently wringing out a mop in a Seoul penthouse, one had to look back 5,000 miles to the humid, electric nights of Lagos. 10 years ago, Amara Okoye wasn't a shadow. She was a sun. A child prodigy who viewed the world in cascading sequences of binary. She had risen through the ranks of Nigeria's burgeoning tech scene until she became the youngest lead security analyst for the national infrastructure. While her peers saw code as a tool for profit, Amara saw it as a shield for the people. That idealism became her undoing. During a routine audit of the country's central banking port, she stumbled upon a backdoor, so sophisticated it could only have been installed by those at the very top of the government. It was a digital siphon, draining billions in aid meant for schools and hospitals into the private offshore accounts of a corrupt regime. Most would have looked away. Amara, fueled by a sense of justice that outweighed her fear, didn't just watch, she fought. Within 48 hours, she had built a counterworm that locked the accounts and sent the encryption keys to an international transparency group. The retaliation was swifter than any server crash. Overnight, her life was dismantled. Her credentials were wiped, her family's assets frozen, and a burn notice was placed on her name by an agency that didn't believe in trials, only disappearances. She realized then that in the digital age, a genius is only as safe as her anonymity. To survive, the girl who could hack the world had to become the woman the world refused to see. She fled across 3 continents, shedding her identity like a second skin, eventually landing in South Korea, a place where the language barrier and her race provided a double layer of invisibility. She traded her keyboard for a scrub brush and her voice for a silent nod. She chose the office of Kang Jae-Min specifically because it was the most secure fortress in the city. If she was under the roof of the Iron Shadow, the ghosts of her past in Lagos would never think to look for her. For years, she had buried her brilliance beneath layers of cleaning chemicals and humble service. She had made herself small so she could live. But as she stood over Jae-Min's shoulder, watching the same type of digital corruption she had fought in Lagos threaten to destroy him, Amara realized that the one thing she couldn't scrub away was her own conscience. Her exile was over, the prodigy was back, and she was the only thing standing between the most powerful man in Seoul and his total annihilation. Kang Jae-Min looked at the server cable, then at the woman standing before him, and for the first time in his life, the Iron Shadow felt the cold vacuum of true isolation. Outside the reinforced glass doors of his office, he could hear the frantic shouting of his elite security team, men he paid millions to be his shield, men who were currently failing to stop a ghost. The monitors pulsed with a rhythmic, mocking red light, a digital heartbeat that was flatlining his life's work. His phone sat dead on the desk, his encrypted lines severed, and his high-priced advisors had vanished into the silence of the network crash. He was the most powerful man in the city, yet he was drowning in a room full of air. His eyes shifted from the system-critical alert to Amara. She stood with her hands at her sides, the gray fabric of her apron a stark contrast to the high-tech chaos of the room. She didn't look like a savior. She looked like the person who emptied his coffee dregs. But her eyes, steady, piercing, and devoid of the panic that had consumed him, held a terrifying level of certainty. "You have 20 seconds before the encryption becomes permanent," she said, her voice cutting through the noise of the cooling fans. "I don't want your money, Jae-Min. I want your keyboard." The hesitation was a physical weight in his chest. Every instinct he possessed, honed through decades of brutal underworld politics, screamed at him not to trust an outsider. He had built his world on the belief that everyone had a price and those at the bottom were merely background noise. To yield to her was to admit that his fortress was a lie and his judgment was flawed. But as he looked toward the door at the guards who were supposed to be his protectors, he saw the flicker of betrayal in the way they avoided his gaze through the glass. They were already mourning him, waiting for the king to fall so they could scavenge the remains. Jae-Min looked back at Amara. The clock on the screen hit the 15-second mark. In a world where everyone was lying to him, her bluntness was the only thing that felt real. With a hand that still trembled slightly, he pushed the ergonomic leather chair aside, creating a path to the central terminal. It was a silent surrender, a shattering of his pride that felt more painful than a bullet. He stepped back, his back hitting the cold glass of the window, and watched as the woman with the mop sat in the seat of power. As her fingers began to fly across the keys with a speed that defied human movement, Jae-Min realized he wasn't just trusting her with his servers. He was trusting her with his soul. The Iron Shadow had finally stopped looking down, and in the reflection of the terminal, he saw the beginning of his only hope. The blue light of the terminal washed over Amara's face, turning her deep brown skin into a mask of cool, electric silver. Behind her, Jae-Min watched in a daze, his chest tight as he witnessed the Iron Shadow being dismantled and rebuilt by a woman he had once scolded for a smudge on a window pane. Her fingers didn't just type, they danced, striking the keys with a rhythmic, percussive authority that sounded like a language he had never bothered to learn. The red warnings began to retreat, replaced by cascading waterfalls of green syntax that meant life, meant wealth, meant survival. Amara's eyes narrowed as she pulled up a hidden subdirectory of the server's kernel. "This wasn't a brute force attack from the outside," she whispered, her voice steady enough to anchor the room. "The gates were opened from within. This is a logic bomb, timed to the millisecond, but it has a stutter." She isolated a string of commands, a series of administrative overrides that had bypassed the biometric scanners. To the untrained eye, it was just text. To Amara, it was a confession. She pulled up a side-by-side comparison of the server's log and a secondary file she had quietly copied months ago. "Everyone has a digital signature, Jae-Min," she explained, not looking back. "Not just a password, but a rhythm. The way a person pauses between a shift key and a vowel, the microseconds of hesitation before hitting enter. It's called a keystroke biometric. It's as unique as a heartbeat." On the screen, two wave-like graphs began to overlap. They moved in perfect, damning synchronization. Jae-Min leaned in, his breath catching. He recognized the pattern. It was the same methodical, aggressive tempo he had heard every morning for 5 years, the sound of his chief of security, Han, drafting the daily briefings. Han, the man currently standing outside that door with a loaded weapon and a promise of protection. "He didn't just steal your data," Amara said, her eyes locked on the final line of code. "He mirrored your entire network to a private cloud owned by Titan Systems. He's been selling you piece by piece for months. This crash tonight, it wasn't the end of the heist. It was the cleanup. He's deleting the evidence of his own presence." The betrayal hit Jae-Min harder than any physical blow. Han had been his shadow, his confidant, the man who knew the names of his children. To see the man's treachery laid bare in the cold, unfeeling light of a cleaner's terminal was a humiliation beyond words. But as the green light finally stabilized and the system secure prompt appeared, Amara did something Jae-Min didn't expect. She didn't stop. "He thinks he's deleted his footsteps," she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "But I've just turned his own signature into a beacon. Wherever he goes, whatever he touches, he's glowing." She turned the chair around, finally meeting Jae-Min's eyes. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so completely that the mahogany desk felt like hers and the corner felt like his. "Now," she said, "do you want to hide or do you want to show him what happens when you miss a spot?" Is 500 words. Keep the same tone, packing, and emotional style as the previous section. Write in a smooth, flowing story format with no section headings. Chapter outline. Chapter 4. The traitor's signature. Amara finds the digital fingerprint in the code that matches the security chief's unique typing rhythm. The silence of the penthouse was shattered not by a sound, but by the sudden, heavy thud of the elevator banks locking down. On the security monitors, the system secure blue was abruptly crowded by flickering gray camera feeds, showing men in tactical gear entering the lobby 40 floors below. The digital betrayal had failed, and now the rivals were sending a physical cleaning crew to finish the job. Jae-Min reached for the handgun hidden beneath his desk, his face hardened by the return of his predatory instincts, but Amara's hand remained firmly on the keyboard. "Put the gun away, Jae-Min," she said, her voice dropping into a low, tactical frequency. "If you fire a shot in this building, your reputation dies with those men. But if the building itself rejects them, you remain the untouchable iron shadow." Jae-Min watched, mesmerized, as Amara bypassed the standard security software and dove into the building's integrated management system. To her, the skyscraper wasn't just steel and glass. It was a living organism with veins of copper and lungs of ventilation shafts. She began to play the building like a dark symphony. As the tactical team reached the 35th floor, Amara didn't cut the power. She manipulated it. She triggered a false fire alarm in the north wing, dropping pressurized halon gas into the stairwells, not enough to kill, but enough to snatch the breath from their lungs and send them stumbling. On the security feed, the intruders began to cough, their coordinated formation breaking into a frantic scramble. She then reversed the polarity of the magnetic door locks, creating a labyrinth that shifted every time they reached a corner. They were elite mercenaries being outmaneuvered by a woman sitting in a swivel chair, using nothing but the building's own maintenance protocols. "They're heading for the service lift," Jae-Min noted, his eyes darting between the screens. His fear was being replaced by a terrifying awe. "Let them," Amara replied. With 3 keystrokes, she overrode the lift's weight sensors and emergency brakes. The elevator carrying the remaining intruders didn't fall. It rose, at maximum velocity, straight to the observation deck, where she locked the doors and cut the air conditioning, turning the glass box into a temporary sauna under the rising Seoul sun. The glass fortress remained silent, but outside the office doors, the sounds of hands panicked shouting grew louder. The chief of security realized his backup wasn't coming. The men Jae-Min had trusted to die for him were trapped in a cage of their own making, neutralized by the very systems they were supposed to command. Amara leaned back, the gray of her apron reflecting the dull light of the suppressed monitors. She hadn't spilled a drop of blood, yet she had cleared the hallways more effectively than a dozen gunmen. Jae-Min looked at the invisible woman and realized that his fortress hadn't cracked because of the enemies outside. It had been saved because the most powerful weapon in the city had been hiding in his janitor's closet all along. The transition from the shadows of the server room to the blinding opulence of the Grand Lot ballroom was a transformation that left Jae-Min breathless. He stood at the top of the marble staircase, his hand resting on the silk-clad arm of a woman the world no longer recognized. Gone was the gray apron and the scent of floor wax. In their place was an emerald-cut silk gown that matched the deep, regal tone of Amara's skin, and a poise that made the surrounding socialites look like trembling amateurs. To the elite of Seoul, she was introduced as an international consultant from a London-based firm. To Jae-Min, she was the only reason he was still breathing. As they descended into the den of vipers, Jae-Min felt his own composure fraying. Every smile from a business rival felt like a concealed blade. Every toast from his board members felt like a rehearsal for his wake. He was the Iron Shadow, but tonight, his shadow felt heavy and sluggish. He found himself constantly checking the perimeter, his eyes searching for Han, the traitor who still believed the digital heist was a success. "Breathe." "Jae-Min," Amara whispered, her voice a calm anchor in the sea of high society chatter. She didn't scan the room with the frantic energy of a hunted man. She observed it with the detached precision of a grandmaster. "Panic is a frequency. If you broadcast it, they will tune in. Right now, you are the predator who doesn't know he's being hunted. Play the part." He watched in awe as she navigated the treacherous waters of the gala. When the CEO of Titan Systems approached them, eyes gleaming with the predatory hunger of a man expecting a bankruptcy announcement, Amara didn't flinch. She engaged him in a conversation about blockchain volatility and decentralized security with a level of technical sophistication that left the billionaire stammering. She wasn't just bait, she was the trap. Jae-Min realized then that his greatest flaw hadn't just been his arrogance, but his narrow definition of strength. He had spent his life equating power with the ability to intimidate, yet here was Amara, controlling the room through sheer, quiet competence. She handled the psychological pressure of the lion's den with a grace he couldn't replicate. While his heart hammered against his ribs, her pulse remained steady, her eyes locked on the target. Across the room, near the velvet curtains of the private lounge, he finally spotted Han. The chief of security looked confused, his brow furrowed as he stared at his encrypted phone, wondering why the logic bomb hadn't yet detonated the Iron Shadow's world. Amara squeezed Jae-Min's arm, a signal. The pawn had reached the end of the board and she had returned as the queen. The game wasn't just being played, it was already over. Jae-Min took a deep breath, mimicking her stillness, and for the first time in his life, he was proud to follow someone else's lead. In the dim glow of the gala's velvet-lined tech lounge, Amara didn't need a sprawling server room to finish the job. She only needed the smartphone in her clutch and the predictable greed of a traitor. Beside her, Jae-Min played his role, nursing a drink and looking like a man whose world was quietly unraveling. But beneath the table, Amara's fingers were moving with the same invisible grace that had once scrubbed his floors. She wasn't just defending his empire anymore. She was building a digital cage. She initiated the honeypot, a deceptive string of code designed to look like a desperate, last-minute transfer of Jae-Min's remaining untraceable assets. To Han, watching from across the room on his encrypted device. It looked like the Iron Shadow was trying to smuggle his last few millions to a private vault in the Cayman Islands. Amara watched the reflection of the ballroom lights in her screen as a notification pinged. The bait had been taken. Han couldn't resist. He intercepted the leak, redirecting the ghost funds to what he believed was his own secure offshore account. "He bit," Amara whispered, her voice barely audible over the swelling string quartet. "He's opening the tunnel now." By stealing the fake money, Han had inadvertently created a persistent, two-way bridge between his device and the source of the attack. Amara watched as the data packets began to hop across global relay stations, bypassing the obfuscation layers Han had so carefully set up. Like a tracer dye injected into a bloodstream, the fake transaction illuminated the entire network of betrayal. The path didn't stop at Han. It led past him, through a series of shell companies, and finally settled on a single, high-security server located in a bunker outside the city. "I have it," she said, a cold edge of triumph in her eyes. "The money didn't just go to Han. It's being cleared by a signature belonging to the apex predator, Titan Systems' lead financier." The proof was absolute. It wasn't just a hack, it was a coordinated corporate assassination. The digital fingerprint she had traced back from the honeypot linked the rival syndicate directly to the sabotage of Jae-Min's infrastructure. Han was no longer just a traitor, he was a trail. Amara looked up from the screen, her gaze meeting Jae-Min's. The Iron Shadow saw the look in her eyes and knew the time for hiding was over. The trap had snapped shut, and for the first time in the history of the Seoul underworld, the predator realized too late that he had become the prey. The gala's private balcony was a sanctuary of cold air and bitter truths. Han stood by the stone balustrade, his silhouette sharp against the Seoul skyline, his thumb hovering over a final confirmation key on his phone. He believed he was seconds away from a king's ransom. He didn't hear the glass door slide open, nor did he sense the change in the atmosphere until Kang Jae-Min stepped into the moonlight, followed closely by a woman whose presence now carried the weight of a mountain. "The signal is dead, Han," Jae-Min said, his voice devoid of its usual explosive rage. It was replaced by something far more terrifying, absolute clarity. "The bank in the Caymans, it doesn't exist. The apex predator isn't waiting for your call. He's currently watching his own servers being drained by a ghost he didn't see coming." Han spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the concealed weapon at his hip, but he froze when he saw Amara. She wasn't holding a gun. She was holding a tablet that displayed every message, every bribe, and every keystroke Han had ever made within the penthouse. The security chief realized in a sickening flash that his every move had been catalogued by the woman who used to empty his trash. He looked at Jae-Min, then at the cleaner, and the bravado he had worn for 5 years collapsed into a pathetic, stuttering mask of fear. "I gave you everything," Jae-Min whispered, stepping closer until he was inches from the traitor. "I gave you my trust, my secrets, and my daughter's safety. I thought my iron fist kept this empire together. I thought fear was the only glue that held men like you in place." He paused, glancing back at Amara, whose expression remained as unreadable as the code she wrote. "But I was blind. I was looking for enemies in the shadows, while the person protecting my life was standing right in front of me, unnoticed." In a final act of desperation, Han lunged for his phone, trying to trigger a manual override, but the screen went dark as Amara tapped a single command. The device was now a brick, a useless piece of glass. Jae-Min didn't strike the man. He didn't need to. The humiliation of being outmaneuvered by the person he had treated as subhuman was a more devastating blow than any physical strike. Jae-Min signaled to the real loyalists, the few who had stayed true, who emerged from the shadows to lead Han away. As the balcony fell silent, Jae-Min looked at his hands, realizing for the first time that his power hadn't come from his fists or his guns. It had been a fragile illusion, one that would have shattered overnight if not for Amara's silent eyes. He turned to her, the hierarchy of their world now completely inverted. "He thought I was the target," Jae-Min said softly, "but he never realized the real threat was the one he never bothered to learn the name of." Amara simply nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon, already calculating the next move in a world that would never look the same again. The aftermath of the gala felt like the cooling of a fever. In the secluded back of a moving limousine, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and neon, reflecting off the darkened windows. Jae-Min sat with a heavy, silver-plated pistol resting on his knee, his eyes fixed on the tablet that held the digital keys to his enemies' lives. With a single command, he could trigger a cascade of accidents, mechanical failures in their cars, fires in their server rooms, or the leaking of their darkest secrets to rivals even more ruthless than himself. The Iron Shadow was back in the light, and his instinct was to stain the night red. "One tap, Amara," he murmured, his voice thick with the residue of his old life. "I can end the threat of Titan systems forever. I can make Shorehand never sees the sun again. Isn't that what power is for, to eliminate the obstacles?" Amara didn't reach for the gun, nor did she try to wrestle the tablet from his hands. She simply sat across from him, her posture as composed as it had been when she was scrubbing his floors. Power isn't the ability to destroy, Jae-Min. Anyone with a match can burn a house down. True power is the ability to build something that doesn't need a match to stay warm. She leaned forward, her eyes catching the passing streetlights. "You've spent your life building a fortress of fear, but tonight you saw how easily fear can be hacked. If you kill them, you just stay in the cycle. You'll be looking over your shoulder for the next traitor, the next logic bomb, the next ghost. You don't need to delete their lives. You need to delete your own." Jae-Min looked at the weapon, then at the woman who had seen his empire at its weakest and didn't flinch. The weight of his criminal legacy felt suddenly unbearable, a suit of armor that had become a cage. He realized that the Iron Shadow was a ghost of a world that was already dying. "Show me," he whispered. Amara took the tablet. Her fingers moved with a rhythmic, constructive grace. She didn't trigger the red protocol. Instead, she began to partition his illegal assets, funneling them into a series of transparent, legitimate trusts. She initiated the dissolution of his gambling dens and shifted the capital into the tech security sector she had already mapped out. She wasn't just erasing his crimes, she was rewriting his future. "You're not a mob boss anymore," she said, handing the tablet back as the car slowed to a halt. "You're a founder, and for the first time in your life, you won't have to wonder who is standing behind you in the dark." Jae-Min looked at the screen. The red system-critical warnings were gone, replaced by the clean, white interface of a new beginning. He picked up the pistol, but instead of checking the clip, he engaged the safety and tucked it into the hidden compartment of the car, leaving it behind. He stepped out into the crisp Seoul morning, no longer a predator, but a man who finally understood that the most powerful thing you can do with an iron fist is open it. 1 year later, the glass fortress that once housed the Iron Shadow had been stripped of its cold, predatory shadows and replaced by the warm, humming light of a different kind of power. The penthouse was no longer a monument to one man's paranoia, but the headquarters of the Okoye Kang group. Here, the air didn't smell of old secrets and expensive cigars. It smelled of fresh possibilities and the quiet energy of people building something meant to last. Kang Jae-Min stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at Seoul. He no longer wore the dark, restrictive suits of a mafia boss. Today, he wore a simple linen blazer, his shoulders relaxed, his jaw no longer set in a permanent clench. He watched the city below, but he didn't see a kingdom to be conquered. He saw a landscape of untapped potential. Beside him, the office was a hive of activity, filled with young analysts and developers, many of whom had been recruited from the same, invisible, corners of society that he had once ignored. The door behind him opened, and he didn't need to turn to know who it was. The rhythm of her stride was confident and steady, the gait of a woman who had finally stepped into the sun. Amara Okoye, now the architect and chief technology officer, joined him at the window. She held a digital brief for their newest project, a secure, non-profit infrastructure for aid organizations in West Africa, designed to ensure that resources reached the people without being siphoned away by the very corruption she had once fled. "The board approved the Lagos initiative," Amara said, her eyes reflecting the bright morning horizon. "The firewalls are holding. The people are getting what they need." Jae-Min turned to her, a genuine smile softening his features. A year ago, he would have counted his success in the number of people who feared him. Today, He counted it in the number of lives they had helped secure. He looked at the woman who had once scrubbed his floors and realized that his greatest achievement wasn't the billions he had saved, but the blindness he had lost. As they looked out over the city together, the iron shadow was truly gone, replaced by the architecture of hope. They were proof that genius doesn't always wear a suit and tie, and that the most powerful person in the room is often the one you haven't bothered to see. In a world of hidden brilliance and the sting of betrayal, they had built a bridge between two different worlds, proving that when the powerful finally look down, they might just find the very person destined to save them. The hierarchy of Seoul had changed forever, not through force, but through the quiet, unbreakable strength of a partnership forged in the light of the truth.